Toot Norberline would like to welcome you to Be Your Own Therapist with the very dedicated Miffi Maxmillion. She is coming to us live from Melbourne, Australia. She's on holiday. Thank you for joining us while you're on holiday. We appreciate it.
Look, it's really my pleasure. I'm thrilled to be here. So yes, I'm in a nice, clean, warm hotel room. Hopefully no housekeeping will burst in the middle of it. Pardon me, I've got sinusitis, so I've got this hacking cough and all sorts of things. Sounds very dramatic, but I'm on medication and I'm fine. And I thought I'd weave it into today's talk and discussion, because I wanted to follow on with what we were talking about last week when we started touching on compassion and the nature of compassion and who we feel compassion for. And I thought, oh, well, you know, if you hear my blocked nose and everything, you might think, oh, poor Miffi. And it's like when we see sickness or illness or suffering in front of us, then we respond with compassion. Generally, you know, if we're not stressed or whatever, that's just a normal human thing to do. But it's kind of like our compassion is relying on us seeing suffering first. And if we don't see suffering, then we don't generate any compassion. And you might think, oh, well, what's the problem with that? But actually, with COVID, we've seen there's been this really big problem, because when we're all in lockdown and we became isolated from each other, then all the social glue dissolved, and then our interactions with people became less and less and less. And so our opportunity to connect and our opportunity then to feel for others and to generate compassion, because it was based on just seeing compassion, seeing suffering in front of us, that just dissolved. And so, you know, you might have been thinking, how come society now, after all of this stuff with COVID and all the terrible things happening in the world, why is everything so fractious? Why is everyone even nastier to each other now, even more impatient with each other, even more upset all the time? And it's because of how we've been generating our compassion. It's not very stable. So I thought that's what we'd have a look at today, to try and unpick it all and see what happened. Because if we just generate compassion when we see obvious pain, we forget about all the other types of stresses and strains in samsara. We forget about the less obvious things, all the hidden backstories that people have. And we become quite, if we're, you know, physically isolated and things, we may become quite disassociated from ourselves and from others. And on the other side of things, then if we do actually start developing some compassion that's quite deep and isn't reliant on just recognizing obvious suffering, that's much more nuanced than that, then our sense of care for others will be really stable. It won't fluctuate around when, you know, people treat us this way or that way, and we won't burn out. So that's the whole other thing that comes into this, that we've all heard the term compassion burnout, haven't we? So let's have a look what that actually is and what we can do about it, because it's a really big thing, but actually it's a bit of a misnomer. So we'll have a look at that too. Anyway, let's take a moment to adjust our motivation. So whatever got us here, now here we are together, joining across our literal light rays, our fiber optics, which I always love, that you're all manifesting to me as bodies of light already on my Zoom app. So here we are together, and we're like the designated practitioners, aren't we? We're the ones that are here. Whether we feel ready or not to help others, we're here and we can. So let's seize this opportunity and really embrace what an extraordinary opportunity we have to help ourselves and others. So Shyla, if you'd like to get the motivation, the screen share up. Okie dokie. Here we go. So let's read this motivation together. What is the purpose of being alive today? It must be something more important than drinking coffee. Today, I will develop bodhicitta, leading to the peaceful path of liberation and full awakening for the benefit of all beings. From this moment on, until I go to sleep, I shall stay aware of every action of my body, speech, and mind. Wherever possible, I shall try to help, and at the very least, I will not harm. And so let's just have this one slide now, because this is where I'd like to start. So extending our wish for freedom. And so on one hand, on the blue writing, we have a wish for our own freedom, freedom from suffering, from the ups and downs of life, from the uncertainty of life, from the dissatisfaction and kind of gnawing boredom and unease and angst that we feel. So if we actually really develop this wish for freedom, it will help us to stop this whole cycle of uncontrolled death and rebirth. So how do we extend this wish for freedom for ourselves? It depends upon deep and pure self-compassion imbued with wisdom. So there's a lot that we talk about self-care, don't we? Self-care and self-compassion. So this is the real meaning of that. What is self-care and what is self-compassion? It is having this wish to definitely emerge from all the problems. So it means wishing to not just get rid of suffering, but get rid of the problems, remove the causes of the problems. And that's the novel thing. Everybody wants to be free of suffering, even down to the mice and the cockroaches. They don't want to suffer, but nobody ever thinks about wanting to be free of the causes of suffering. So having this determination to become free of the causes of suffering, that's the ultimate self-care or self-compassion. And when we then extend that to others, wishing all others to have freedom from all the sufferings of samsara, all the uncertainty, we extend that self-care to others. So it depends upon our extending our compassion to every living being. So I just thought, this term self-care or self-compassion or some me time, we hear all of that, don't we? And I must admit, it makes me cringe a bit. It creeps me out. I was trying to figure out, why does that make me feel so uncomfortable? Because, what's wrong with it? But there's something fundamentally skewed about it. And I think what's happened, like we were talking about last week, of the dovetailing of like the wellness industry and commerce and right-wing ideology and all of these things, that they dovetail together. And the same has happened here with self-compassion. And the dead set giveaway that Corey Jackson pointed out to me was that whenever in the mainstream we hear about self-care or self-compassion, it's always about external things. It's always about having a rest, having a holiday, looking after your diet, taking time out, going to a spa, blah, blah, blah. It's all these external things. And it's all based on physical things. Even sometimes it's about, spending time with your family, maybe people mention that, but hardly ever. It's always about taking more time or having a rest. None of it's about looking in your heart or your mind, where we actually feel the suffering, is it? So this self-care kind of thing, I feel it's almost been co-opted by the what about me kind of whinge, instead of going straight to the core of the matter, which is it's me, it's my mind and my heart that is suffering. And that's where I have to give the care. And what kind of care do we need? So it's a big mistake to think that the self-care and all those things, because as we know, even if we do go on holiday or even if we do have a wonderful meal, we're still depressed, we're still stressed, That's not going to fix the problem, does it? And in fact, it can make us feel even worse because we can have all of those good things and they're not working. And then if that's all that's available to us, then it's really serious and people get quite suicidal. But it's because we've missed looking within, actually looking where the real self-care is. Sometimes if you do go on holiday, like I'm on holiday now, you do get time to reflect, but it's almost like it's accidental, isn't it? You're lying by the pool or you're on the train and you start thinking about things in a different way. And so you do turn within and get time. And that's why a holiday works. But if your whole holiday is involved in trying to get all the good experiences or have fun, you're just going to end up more stressed, aren't you? So let's see. And then the other thing, of course, that really distresses me when I hear about all this self-care stuff is, well, what if you can't take time off work? What if you can't have a rest? What if you're the sole breadwinner of your family and you can't do all of it? What if you've got no money to have a holiday and you can't do any of those things that everybody suggests you do? It's like, well, that's just for people who've got, disposable income. I can't do that. So then what? Does that mean anyone who's busy or poor or has some kind of illness has no chance of self-care or self-compassion? It's really terrible, isn't it? So I painted the picture, right? Do you have any questions or comments so far? Does it make sense? Shayla, you'll have to tell me if there are any questions. I'm not sure if I can see everybody.
So far, nothing's in the chat.
No. Okay. So the way that as a Buddhist that we can think about self-care and self-compassion is the uncontrived aspiration to definitely emerge. And that's why that picture of the fish, to definitely emerge from samsara, from the roiling seas of samsara. And that's what's commonly called renunciation. And I mean, that's what blew my mind when Eddie said to me, well, the ultimate self-care is renunciation. What? But that's what it is. But of course, when I hear renunciation, I can't help it. The first thing I think of is no fun. I always think it's a horrible thing. But actually, renunciation, that's self-care, that's self-compassion. It really is. Shayla, you've got it. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. So when we think of it, that determination to emerge, that's the more literal translation of that term rather than renunciation. But yeah, self-compassion. And then when you really understand your own kind of state of existence, then you can start extending that to others. Okay, so Shayla, let's have the next slide. And I thought we'd also, here we go. Empathy is not compassion. I really wanted to differentiate between these two. So empathy is a precursor to compassion. And even with empathy, there are two types of empathy. So we've got on the left here, affective empathy, which is where you feel for the other person. And that's generally when we hear about someone having a lot of empathy, that's what we're referring to. But then there's also cognitive empathy, where you think it through. And they're different systems. But in our Western tradition, they're lumped together, which is just crazy. It's like lumping Italian and Greek food together or Italian and Middle Eastern food together and expecting people to get the benefits of both. Like, it's just, they're really different systems. And when we ignore one or the other, we get into trouble. So if we use our empathy, those existing feelings, using our reasoning and logic, and then we extend it out to include everybody, then we get to generate compassion. So you get rid of the slide now, and I'll come back to it again. And I really found this so beneficial for me because, you know, in Buddhist circles, we talk about generating bodhicitta and great compassion and all these things, and it can be quite big and overwhelming, and especially if your own life is quite overwhelming. So all the little steps that lead up to it. And then, of course, we have this translation problem where, you know, when we hear about the term compassion burnout, like we've heard of that, haven't we? Actually, that's a misnomer. What it is empathy burnout. We're overwhelmed with empathy. We have nowhere to go with our empathy, and then we burn out. It's impossible to burn out with compassion because compassion is an activity and it generates energy. But we've conflated the two. We think empathy and compassion are the same thing, but they're really, really different. So just being able to differentiate between the two is a really, really good start. Our empathy can lead to compassion if we have a plan. But if we don't implement that plan, our empathy will burn us out. And then one or two things happens. Either we have so much empathy, we feel for everybody, our heart is moved over and over and over again, and it's like our adrenal glands are blown, you know. We become insensitive as a way of coping. And so a lot of first responders fall into this category, and that's the way that they're told to deal with empathy burnout, is to just cut off your emotions. Like,
Miffi?
that's going to lead to cynicism and unkindness down the track, and it doesn't help with burnout. So when we have all of these huge empathy feelings and nowhere to go with them, then we either cut off and become really insensitive, make bad decisions. We squash our feelings down, and then we lose our link to compassion, or we get completely burnt out and can't handle it anymore. And that's pretty much like the state of play at the moment because of this confusion between empathy and compassion. Shayla, there's a question?
Yes. Sergio wants to know, is compassion active empathy?
No, it's a result of using our empathy. But you're right there, Sergio, with the word active. Compassion is an activity. So compassion isn't a feeling, it's a doing. So let's just backtrack a bit to look at these two types of empathy and see how they can lead, how they're a precursor to compassion. So, you know, the first one, oh, it's okay, Shayla. The first one, affective empathy. So when we feel for someone. You know, I watched a lot of the house shows, and they get some you know, family that's lost their house in the floods, and they do the house up, and then the family comes and everybody cries, and I cry too. Like, you know, you can't help it. Or you're at a wedding and everyone cries and you cry too. So that's just this, you know, they often talk about mirror neurons. You resonate. It also happens, for instance, if you go out on the town and someone gets really drunk and they vomit, everybody else gets a bit vomity too. Or like I was on an interstate bus and someone got car sick and everyone's like, oh, don't think about it, don't think about it. So that's also affective empathy. You know, someone cries on the television, we start tearing up as well. So this is good because it connects us to others. It's not good if everyone around you, you know, has food poisoning, is vomiting, for instance. And it's also not good with the mirror neurons. If everyone around you is angry, you're going to be responding in kind too. And so when we went into lockdown, a lot of this affective empathy was lost because we just weren't interacting with people. And so our one chance to feel for others was gone because it was dependent on an external condition. It wasn't dependent on us thinking about others. It was dependent about us having others in front of us and then recognizing suffering. So that's the affective empathy. Then we've got cognitive empathy, and that's where you think it through, or you might understand, instinctually understand, but you don't actually feel it. So who's really good at this is if you've got a really good doctor. So if you go to the doctors with food poisoning, you're a bit vomity. Imagine if they had affective empathy, right? Then it'd be you vomiting and the doctor vomiting. That's hopeless. Like, no one ever go there. So a doctor has to have really good cognitive empathy and be completely unmoved emotionally, or they can't do their job. But they do have that empathy. They do know what you're going through, and they can put yourself in you, and they can do it with wisdom, and then they can help you. Who else is also even better at this is parents, because parents have to be able to put themselves, especially babies who, you know, pre-verbal, put themselves into the baby's shoes to try and figure out what is wrong. But what if a parent also felt all the pain and distress that the baby was feeling? They'd be incapable of being a parent. So parents have this as a skill just by necessity have developed cognitive empathy. And then once you get up to teenagers, well, you've also got to have cognitive empathy with them without being as all over the show as they are. So I've got a lot of this information from Corey Jackson, you know, who's part of the CEB, Cultivating Emotional Balance, and B. Alan Wallace and Glenn Svensson, that whole bunch of kind of really interesting neuroscience, Buddhist psychology overlap. And so Corey also pointed out there's a whole other bunch of people that have really high cognitive empathy, and that's torturers. So torturers know exactly and abusers, you know, psychological abusers and physical abusers. They know, they have insight into what's going to harm someone and how it's going to hurt them. And they have this through karma, you know, an instinctual understanding, with no affective empathy. So it doesn't affect them at all. So it's really disjointed like that. So you can see how if you've got too much of one, you can become very disassociated from others, you know, too much of the cognitive side. And if you've got too much of the feeling side, you can go nuts with it all. You have nowhere to go. You don't know how to use it, and you become too overwhelmed. So we really need to have both. So then how can we use this as a precursor? We take our existing feelings of empathy, where we see, you know, we've got all these nice friends and then one of them gets sick and we feel for them. So that's our starting point. We can't just leave it at there, because also if we're reliant on just seeing the problem in front of us, we're going to get fixated on trying to fix that problem. And this is the other thing that happens to first responders. What if you can't fix that problem? If we've gone from this feeling of wishing to help, which is an attitude, and that's actually the compassion part, wishing to help, to do something, to save others from their problems, and we've become fixated on the actual thing out there. What if we can't save them? What if they die? What if we don't get there in time? Then we feel ourselves as a failure. And to cope with that trauma, then we cut ourselves off. We stop feeling the compassion. We go, I can't go through this again. I can't feel this again. And that comes because we start getting fixated on the external thing as going to be the solution. So it goes to quite a few layers. Compassion can sometimes manifest in external activities, but it always manifests as an attitude in our heart. But normally when we practice compassion, we're just thinking of the external activities. And it's a bit of a trap. And then we get, fixated on being, goal oriented, on having the external successes. Whereas sometimes all you can do is just try, and it's not going to work, and it's not going to work, and it's not going to work. And how do we keep doing that without burning out? So now there's got to be some questions or comments. Shayla.
Nothing from the chat, but one thing that I'm learning right now is to be kind to myself. I don't mind being kind to everybody else, but being kind to myself is sometimes, it never happens. I think I expect myself to be superhuman. And
yeah, that's right. But also that expectation, Shayla, I think it comes from, because we should always expect ourselves to be superhuman, because we can become superhuman. But why it's painful is we expect it to be now. And we expect it to be in all things.
yes.
So that's, again, it's gone from being the within here to fixating on the specific external activities. And if one of those doesn't work, then we get so disappointed. And then we lose our initiative, don't we? We lose our mojo. And it's because all the attention's gone from this attitude to the one thing out there. So yeah, that's right. And it takes courage and big-heartedness to be able to actually experience empathy, for starters, because it takes it out of our, when we see compassion and then we mirror it and we feel it, it's not pleasant. Maybe the opening of our heart might feel good, but it's a suffering thing. We're mirroring suffering. So we have to have somewhere to go with it. Susan had a hand up. Yes.
And Alicia also.
Oh, right. Good. Okay, cool. Good. Susan, go for it.
Oh, well, Alicia was ahead of me, but that's okay. I mean, okay. Miffi, when you said uncontrived determination to change, what do you mean by uncontrived?
Yes. So first it starts off with contrived. So that's where we think it through and we have this determination to do something about not just the suffering, but the causes of the suffering. And we might get there after our discussion today, and we might have an aha moment and then we forget. So when we don't forget, then it's uncontrived. Okay. So for most of us, we just have to keep on reminding ourselves again and again and again. It's a bit like fake it till you make it. So it's contrived. We have to work there. Just like with cognitive empathy, we have to work at it. And then after a while, it'll become uncontrived, meaning spontaneous, natural, automatic.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And Delisha.
I was just curious. I'm not quite sure what my question is, but I think it's about, so we feel empathy, which can lead to compassion. We see a problem, and I can recognize what you're saying about not being fixated on the external problem or on the outcome of that problem. But also we've talked about compassion being active. And I'm just not sure, like, if we're not focused on the external problem, what are we focused on, or what should we fixate on, if you like? Like, what are we doing that is active, I guess?
Yeah, I get that. So it's got two branches, your question. That's a really good one. So one of the things is that normally when we talk about compassion, we're just thinking of the most obvious sort of suffering. So obvious physical suffering or obvious emotional turmoil. And that's generally what does it for us. On a good day when we're not stressed or brutalized or any of those things. And we forget that that's just the easy suffering. That's the obvious suffering. There's way more other nuances. So what about the suffering of change? contaminated happiness, the suffering of whatever we get, we have to worry about it breaking. The suffering of whatever we have, you know, it changes into its opposite. There always comes with strings attached. The suffering of uncertainty, this just the stresses of daily life. So, you know, when I see all of you, I don't immediately think, oh, suffering sentient beings. I think, oh, you know, happy people at my class. But that's wrong. We're all suffering. We're all suffering the suffering of change, of uncertainty. So we can look around us and there might be one person crying on the bus, but everybody's suffering. And so how I remember it, like the colloquial way, is that I just remember everyone has a backstory. And it might all appear like happy families, but everybody has a backstory. And it may not be obvious. So that's just for like the general neutral strangers. And you can do that. And that's using your cognitive empathy. You're using reasoning and logic to work it out. And then you get it. You go, oh, yeah, that's right. And you might just hear one or two things about someone and they become coloured in as a human being, and you get it. Oh, wow, you know, they've got problems and stresses and strains too. But we need to work at that. It's not uncontrived yet. And so, I mean, this is the terrible thing, that if we just rely on the obvious suffering, what if we don't recognise suffering? Or what if we've got the people in the category of an enemy, so we're happy they're suffering? All of this is, so our compassion is really based on these this unstable kind of external circumstances. So really what happens with empathy is that like it's only when a disaster happens to us that we notice it happens to others. And this is really, like, I'm really ashamed about this. This is really embarrassing, but it's just how it works, isn't it? It's not till the terrible thing happens to you that you notice it ever happened to anybody else. I mean, COVID's just a brilliant case in point. You remember at the beginning of COVID, everyone said, oh, these unprecedented times, you know, this what's happened to the world. It's a whole new, incredible, you know, and the word unprecedented times just was over and over and over again. And I really riled at that, because it's not unprecedented times. In living memory, just like a decade or so ago, there was the whole AIDS pandemic. And that was like worse, because there was the stigma on top of it as well. But if you weren't touched by that AIDS pandemic, it didn't even happen to you. No one even knew it was on until now. Oh, COVID pandemic, and it's the first experience someone has with a pandemic, and now because of that, then you think it's unprecedented. So that's like our compassion relies on these external circumstances, instead of thinking, well, not only was the AIDS, you know, epidemic that when it first happened in the 80s with all the fear and all the stigma, what about all the plagues, you know, going all the way back? So it takes our own personal disaster for us to notice anybody else's. And this is the great usefulness of our own suffering, that finally it can just wake us up. And if we suffer, then we can notice it in others. But it's only going to be useful if we can work with it. If we just feel it, then we're just going to get overwhelmed, which is what happened with everybody, just overwhelmed. What on earth has happened to the world with COVID? Because we had nowhere to go with it. So I am kind of weaving all the elements of your question together, Alicia. Don't worry, haven't forgotten it. So
no, it's amazing. Thank
you. You know, so we have the obvious pain. We have, like I talked about at the beginning, that then when we're isolated, then we don't see the obvious pain anymore. So we become quite insular and quite insensitive to others. So we actually start acting insensitively without any compassion at all, just from not having anything to do with others. So that's pretty dangerous kind of state to be in when we lose our social glue. So then we've got to build it back up again. We've got to use our cognitive empathy. So it's, you know, we have our self-compassion, we recognize our own suffering, and it's not just the obvious, it's just the suffering of the daily grind. And then we look to the third layer of suffering, which is the compounded or pervasive suffering, which is like, you know, the very nature of existence is problematic. While we're in samsara, it's problematic. And it's like, you know, gravity or something. We're never aware of it, and it's there all the time. And it's the deepest one. And it's the most profound one. And it's the main one. Pardon me. We don't even notice it. And this is actually the main thing we're seeking refuge from in Buddhism, is that all-pervasive compounding suffering, not the other ones. The other ones bring us to Buddhism. But while we just stay at this obvious suffering, that's really superficial. It's this really deep one. And if we get that, if we actually understand, you know, the ups and downs of our life and how uncertain it is, and then just the fact that we have a body means we're going to get sick, we're going to get old. Just the fact that we have relationships means we're going to have fights, you know, we're going to have problems, all of these things. Everybody experiences this. This is a problem for everyone. So then how can we discriminate between people we like and people we don't like? So it's only when we look at these deeper forms of suffering, so that, you know, the one of the changeable suffering, this is how we can start feeling compassionate for the rich, fortunate people. Because we might think, oh, they're happier or have a better life than me. They have exactly the same sufferings as me. But how do you feel for them? You know, I remember Rinpoche saying one time, you know, it's not just the poor ones, the rich ones too. We can't forget them. The rich ones too. They suffer too. And I was like, oh, yeah, right. But of course, because everybody suffers from that uncertainty and the ups and downs and the dissatisfaction. But more than that, everybody suffers from this all-pervasive compounding suffering, where whatever we do to try to make things better makes things worse. So that one, if we understand that one, that can even help us care for our enemies. That can even help us care for someone like Putin or someone like a shooter. You know, where effective empathy isn't going to, you're not going to feel like that. You might actually, on an affective level, feel revulsion and want to vomit. But your cognitive empathy can have a very profound understanding of the nature of human beings and how no one ever acts out through happiness. It's always through suffering. So the worse people act, the worse their suffering. So then you can have really strong cognitive empathy. And after a while, it'll become uncontrived. It'll become really genuine. You won't have to work it out through the steps. So in the end, hopefully we'll be able to even look at our enemies, even look at the troublemakers, the really destructive people, and have real care and concern for them because we know they're suffering. We understand it. That they're angry, that they're destructive, means they're suffering. So I suppose the only person that might naturally have effective empathy for someone like that is a mother. A mother knows, regardless of how screwed up their child is, that they're suffering. But all the rest of us, we have to work at it. Or we have to take the idea that we're like a mother for all sentient beings, isn't it? So that's kind of the backstory of how to develop our, let's see, our empathy, quite nuanced, so that it's both the feeling and then both the empathy for the different layers of suffering that are not as obvious. And if we don't really work at that, we'll never have a proper refuge, because we're taking refuge from the wrong thing. It's got to be from that all-pervasive compounding suffering That's what we're seeking refuge from, seeking liberation from. So then we work at that, then we can develop actual compassion. So Shayla, let's have the next slide, which is the rest of the answer for you, Alicia. Alicia, I'm not sure, how do I say it?
Alicia.
Alicia.
You nailed
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah.
Alicia, great. So compassion, a virtuous mind that wishes others to be free from suffering. So this is, it's a virtuous mind, meaning that it's going to result in happiness. And it's a wish for others to be free from suffering. So it's not just, how awful they're suffering. It's an activity. I wish you were free from suffering. So it's gone from the affective empathy into an attitude, an action. I wish you were free from suffering. So that's the beginning of it, this wish for others to be free from all their problems. And that attitude we never have to lose. Whether we can actually do anything about those problems or not isn't the point, because the point is this attitude. It's taking responsibility for the welfare of others. And it starts with this wish. I wish you were free from suffering. So even when we say that word, I wish you were free from suffering, who's the emphasis on? It's not about I wish you were free from suffering, it's I wish you. So we've taken the whole shift from ourselves to the other, and that just takes the pressure off ourselves. So we go, I wish you were free from suffering. And that attitude we can keep all the time. And if we find ourselves losing it, it's because we've got fixated on the physical external activity instead of this attitude, always keeping the attitude, I wish others were free from suffering. So that attitude, it primes us to be ready to act when we can, when the circumstances are there. But it means we're always primed. And then we just act what we can do. We might be able to do anything. We might be living in a cave meditating. We might be just looking after our family and our cats. But one day we might walk out onto the pavement and someone's fallen down. And instead of freezing, instead of being shy, instead of being embarrassed, instead of being oblivious, we're primed and we just naturally will go to help. So, I mean, I know I don't have that because something happens and I go, oh, what do I do? I'm not primed enough. You know, if we've developed our wisdom and we've developed our compassion, then we're ready. We're much more realistic. We know if we can do something, and if we can't do something, no problem. The attitude's always there. So that's like the next little step. And actually, that's the real big one of recognizing that compassion isn't a feeling. Empathy is the feeling. Compassion's responsibility. It's a doing thing. It's a conclusion. It's actually a reasoned and mature response. It's not a feeling. And then that's great because you can have compassion for people and animals that you don't feel for. So you can have really strong compassion for crocodiles that might be going extinct or snakes that might be going extinct, and you don't feel warmly towards them at all. But you can have genuine compassion and you can understand on a really fundamental level, wow, that, you know, a snake's existence and a crocodile's existence is dominated by fear and aggression. How can that be anything but suffering? You know, crocodiles, when they're in the womb and then they all the little eggs hatch, all those little crocodilets, they eat each other until there's one left. That's even before they've come out. I mean, what kind of traumatic existence is that? So there's no way I'm going to cuddle a crocodile, but I wouldn't want to hurt one, and I would like to be able to help them. So yeah, we need to have that kind of, then we can develop the compassion. And then if we keep developing the compassion, then we can turn it into great compassion, which is for everyone, not just the obvious ones or not just the nice ones. There was one other thing I wanted to. Oh yeah, that's right. So because of course, as a Buddhist, we'd want our compassion to be able to develop into bodhicitta, isn't it? And so bodhicitta, that's the big one. That's almost so big it's impossible to get your head around. You know, this genuine wish to be able to help every single living being out of suffering and into an everlasting peaceful state. And OMG, how am I going to do that? Well, the only possible way to do that is to become fully omniscient, so I can. So, okay, list of things to do today, omniscience. So I have this really dear friend, a young girl, so she might have been like on her 10th birthday or something. She took a photo for, it was for New Year's resolution, and she'd come and drop into our New Year's Nyungnays. She loved doing Nyungnays. She wasn't allowed to do a full one, so she'd come and she'd do a session every now and again. And in one of the breaks, she wrote her New Year's resolutions down, and it was like, be nicer to the cat, do the chores that mummy wants me to do, get enlightened. Oh, wow, that's right. So she's got it. She's got it. That's right. I've got to become omniscient. If I'm going to help everyone, I need to become omniscient. There's no other way to do it. So how are we can't go, oh, no, I'll never be able to. It's just the wish to be able to. And then we develop it slowly and slowly. And one day we will be able to do it. But it's not contingent on these external things. Can I do it today? It's this attitude. And it's certainly not a burden like, oh, my God, that sounds too difficult. It's actually what gives us the impetus is the all sentient beings. Because, you know, Shayla, even if like we try and be kinder to ourselves, it's not enough incentive for just ourselves. But once we go, if I learn to really be kind to myself, I will know how to treat others. I will be trustworthy with others. I'll have the courage to look at others' problems without freaking out, only when we've been able to look into our own heart and our own problems. Then we've got an incentive. But like I've found, unless, you know, it's only when my friends have had really terrible problems or mental health issues, that's been the incentive for me to look in my own mind and try and figure out what's going on. Just what's going on in my own mind, it's like, oh, yeah, whatever, I don't want to know. So we've got to have a bigger incentive. I really think we've got to, otherwise it can become quite a burden. So when I was little, you know, I was brought up a Buddhist, and when I first heard about bodhicitta, I didn't understand what it was about. I didn't have all this background of empathy or of really understanding suffering or of understanding that we actually have the potential to do something about it. It's not like a lost cause. All the political systems in the world basically say it's a lost cause, and all the materialist systems will, but Buddhism shows it's not a lost cause. We can actually do something about this. When I was 6, I didn't know. I had all the bad, all the suffering, and I didn't know the potential. So I'd just be there like, oh, I want to become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings, but what can I do? I'm only 6. And it was so heavy. Like I just felt so bad. But bodhicitta shouldn't make you feel bad. Bodhicitta is actually this huge energy to help others because it's informed by all of this backstory. Effective empathy, cognitive empathy, understanding all the 3 layers of suffering, turning it into compassion, turning it into great compassion, and then naturally it's going to end up being bodhicitta, the wish to become a Buddha to save every single living being from suffering.
Barbara has a question.
Oh, yes, go for it.
Okay, so I'm really I'm blown away by your distinction between empathy and compassion. I'm going to see if I can articulate something. So, like when that burnout occurs, it like that identity with another person, a person can end up blaming the victim. So it's like, she was raped. Oh, well, what was she wearing?
Yeah,
and
that's right. Yeah.
kind of like those uncomfortable feelings that we start to feel that we need to separate ourselves from. Or like, slaughterhouse workers, they have more incidents of domestic violence. Like they start to, they
desensitized. Yeah.
right. Yeah, desensitized. So empathy is about connecting to the other person with and feeling what they're feeling. But compassion seems like it's acknowledging, it's like we're all suffering. That happens to be your suffering. It's like it's a little bit of like I
No,
think
it's more.
like the
That's
idea
still
of,
the empathy.
like the equanimity is like seeing the other person and not connecting necessarily, but seeing it.
No, that's the
Yeah.
cognitive empathy. So that's all the empathy side. So
Okay.
you feel for others, that's the effective empathy. Or if you work in a slaughterhouse, or you're a really burnout, first responder or emergency nurse or something, you stop feeling. And why do you stop feeling or get desensitized? Is because it's just too much. And why is it too much? Because we have nowhere to go with it. So we have, like, blow by blow, we have this, we recognize suffering for starters. Doesn't happen unless we actually see it. We see some suffering, so it's usually the obvious one, someone in pain. And then we mirror that, we feel it just like them. Now that's not pleasant. So it's got to go somewhere. So one way, if we can't do anything with it, we'll try and get rid of that feeling, that mirror neuron, that feeling of suffering, because they're suffering and I'm suffering. We're trying to get rid of it. So there's instinctual ways we shut down emotionally. We become desensitized, brutalized. So we don't feel it anymore. So a whole lot of, domestic violence and all of these things, that's this trajectory of brutalization, where you feel things very keenly, you can't handle the feeling, because it's all about me and I don't want to feel this pain, you shut down. People also do this, like when their animals are sick and dying, they go, I can't bear to witness this suffering, so I'm going to put my dog down. I'm going to kill my own dog because I can't bear the suffering. So again, it's because we don't have anywhere to go with this feeling. So the feeling once, and like you said with the equanimity, that's then when we take that feeling and we use cognitive empathy and we go, oh yeah, not just these ones suffering, but the others are suffering. We're all suffering in different ways, but that's still empathy. And we're still not doing anything with that feeling. In fact, we could be making ourselves feel worse and worse. And many people, when they meditate on compassion, start feeling worse and worse because they're not meditating on compassion. They're just generating more and more feelings of empathy. So you have this wave of empathy coming up. Then it's got to translate into something. And that translating it is, I've got to do something.
Okay.
And so that's the activity. So the activity is, goes, actually, there's 3 steps. How wonderful it would be if sentient beings were free from this suffering. That's the first one. That's the first dawning of compassion. You wish them to be free from it. And that's different than just feeling it. And then, so you go, oh, how amazing, like, wouldn't it be incredible if they were free from it? Then you go, I wish it was true. May they be free from it. So now it's like this kind of little bit little bit of determination's coming in. May it happen. It's got to happen. So, I mean, you might notice this if you've worked in social justice or something like that. You go from the feeling of empathy to I've got to this has got to stop, to someone's got to stop it. And then what's the next thing? They're not doing it. They're not doing it. Oh my God. Well, I'm going to do it. It's got to be me. I have to do something. So then you go, and I will cause them to be free from suffering. So in the extended meditation for the 4 immeasurables, this is the steps you go through. Imagine if people were free from their suffering. Wow. May this happen, you know. May I be the one to do it. Can't wait around. And then not only that, but there's more, because we have all of our objects of refuge, and it's like, please, Guru Buddha, bless me so I can do this. It's not us by ourselves. We have all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to help us. So that's the compassion bit. All the rest, it's still stuck in empathy. Who knew? So we've just about run out of time. Shayla, there's
Alicia has her hand.
oh,
up. That's okay.
Alicia, yes.
Sorry, just a really quick question. With that process, I feel like when you're thinking about the feeling, and then this has to stop, someone has to stop it. It has to be me that stops this suffering. But in that process, it's not thinking about I have to stop all these external causes of suffering. You're actually thinking of it's sort of, I can see how it would be really easy to think I've got to fix all the external problems.
Yeah, I've got to fix
so it's
all
actually
the things.
So when we're thinking about it has to be me that stops the suffering, the way we do that is by achieving enlightenment, essentially, or working on our own minds rather than trying to change all the problems in the world. Is that?
Yeah, we've got to bring in the wisdom, and that's why we've always got to have the wisdom of the Buddhist view as we go through, especially the emotional stuff, because it's not just the emotion, the obvious things, and it's got to be informed by, like Barbara said, you know, an equanimity that sees the how we're all equal in the suffering, how we're all equal in being, you know, not in control of our lives. So all of that, we've got to bring in the wisdom, and then we've got to bring in the wisdom on the other side that brings the hope, which is that we all have a potential to become free, that it's actually possible, that the nature of our mind, you know, is pure and clear, that we can remove these causes. We've got to have an absolutely unshakable conviction about that, or we'll get really depressed. So that's got to bring in the wisdom. So the wisdom always supports the compassion. It's different from the West. In the West, compassion is like this added extra that supports our knowledge. But in Buddhism, wisdom supports everything.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's have the last slides because they'll sum it all up really nicely. So we've had, okay, so observing mere living beings. So one of the things that this is about how we recognize that our existence is in the nature of suffering. So there's this analogy of like a well, you know, we go up and down the well, like up and down the realms, this bucket clattering up and down the well, and it's very easy to go down. Takes no effort at all to be negative, to just plummet down. That never takes effort. But to come back up again, to bring ourselves out of the doldrums, let alone out of the lower realms, every time we've got to turn the handle to bring it up, it takes effort. It always takes effort. And as we do, we're getting knocked about all the way, either side. So, I mean, it's an analogy that keeps on giving, but this is the state for all of us, whether we're up or whether we're down, it's always a strain. And so this is a way we can remember that it's not just the obvious pains, but it's the whole thing. It's the all-pervasive conditionality as well. And so then when any kind of experience of when we witness suffering, others or our own, it can open our heart to others, but only if we're not grasping at just me here and others over there. It's only if we've already kind of recognized that there is no inherent self to grasp at, that we're all in the same boat, the same well, that there isn't an inherent me and mine and the others over there. So, you know, the wisdom and the compassion work together in this one. Observing mere living beings. And this is a way to actually meditate on compassion without being bogged down in just getting depressed, because there's a lot of wisdom in it. Because it's tricky when you meditate on compassion and not just get the empathy burnout. So the main thing about this is to recognize how we're all powerless. The rich and the poor, the happy, the sad, we're all powerless. So it's looking really below, you know, the mean and the kind. Below the surface, we're all powerless like this. So the next slide, observing phenomena. Every sentient being is subject to change. So just like you have like the moon, but on the rippling water, it's constantly changing all the time. So we have this idea of grasping at constancy, at permanence. And we kind of think, oh, you know, if I only had enough rest, or if I only ate well enough, or I only had a stable living situation, I'd be fine. As if there's some permanent I'd be fine state that we're always aiming for. But actually it's not there. It's always changing. And even, you know, things might come and we have a disaster here and a disaster there. But even if no disaster had happened, things would disintegrate. We get older, the house will fall down eventually. So observing phenomena about this sentient beings and phenomena, so, you know, ourselves and our environment, we're qualified by impermanence. So there's a couple of things here. So on one hand, this can freak us out. We can think, oh, you know, our youth and our looks and our health will leave us. When we're young, we might think, oh, this is me. You know, I'm fantastic. I'm full of beans, or I'm great. And then we get older and we realize, oh no, that was just youth. That wasn't me at all. Dang. But actually, on one hand, we recognize, oh dear, everything's going to fade like that. But on the other hand, thank goodness for impermanence. I mean, it would be a really sad state of affairs if there wasn't impermanence. So then even just on a day-to-day level, there's a great joy in seeing kids grow up, seeing people develop. There's a real joy in seeing people change. And that's also thanks to impermanence. Delusion also is impermanent. Thank goodness. Next slide. Observing the unobservable. So this is where we recognize every sentient being is empty of inherent existence. And again, this is like the reflection of the moon in the water. So there's, you know, we're looking, if our mind is calm and we're looking at the moon in the water, we might think, oh, there's a moon in there. We might look in the mirror and think, oh, there's a face in there. It's not, it's just a reflection. And so the reflection appears real, but it isn't real. And this is really nice because it's like wherever wherever our mind can be calm and still, then it can reflect the moon. You know, every single calm little puddle and lake and cup of coffee can reflect the moon. It's not like, oh, that's enough moons now, we've run out. It's infinite. So here we are. If we just calm our mind, we can reflect the compassion of the Buddhas. We can reflect the loving kindness of the Buddhas just by becoming still. We can let that compassion flow through us. We can become, it's like a conduit for the Buddhas. So they say, you know, that any compassion that sentient beings experience, it's not sentient beings' compassion, it's the compassion of the Buddhas. It's like we're the conduit. We are that moon's reflection. And that just opens it up for us. There was a little story actually, sorry, that I was reading all about this from Jeffrey Hopkins, and he told this really funny story about how we kind of grasp at this inherent existence. So he said he was in a restaurant, and, you know, they have all the low lighting, and they have various, you know, archways in between tables and mirrors and things like this to kind of create the ambience. And so he hadn't quite adjusted to where everything was in the restaurant. And he looked over there and he went, "Oh, who's that really scruffy looking fellow?" And it was a reflection of him in one of the mirrors. So, I mean, it's so funny, isn't it? So most of the time we're a bit like that, aren't we? But equally, we can reflect the moon. We can reflect that compassion of the Buddhas. Okay, and then the last couple of slides. So great compassion. So this is the difference between compassion, just kind of general compassion, is a wish for others to be free of suffering. But then great compassion has this idea of all beings. So it's with that equanimity. It's not missing out on anybody, because we understand even the Putins of this world need to be liberated, need to be free of their suffering and their angst and their destructive minds. And great compassion takes it a step further. Instead of wishing them to be free, it goes wishing to protect. So there's the activity again. There's the action, wishing to protect living beings from their suffering. So it's the activity, the kind of taking the responsibility, and that attitude, you know, whatever it takes, you know, failure is not an option, all of those things. This is where they really come into their own, of not just wishing, oh, how nice it would be if people were free from suffering. I'm going to protect them from suffering. It's so nice, isn't it? So if there are no questions, we better do the dedication, which is the next slide. So we can think that, you know, whatever stood out for us, and if, like me, you're absolutely mind blown by just recognizing the difference between empathy and compassion, that is brilliant, because then we can see, use that empathy. Don't try and push it down when it gets too much. Translate it into this determination to protect others, to prime ourselves to be ready. Whatever circumstances arise, we're gonna just do the best that we can naturally, appropriately, according to our circumstances. We'll be ready. And when not, we'll just be thinking really thinking really well of others. So, due to all the merits of the 3 times accumulated by me and by others, merely by seeing, hearing, remembering, touching, or talking to me, may any being be freed in that very second from all their sufferings, diseases, spirit harms, negative karmas, and obscurations, and abide in the peerless happiness of full enlightenment forever. So thank you for listening to my slightly kind of flu-like ramblings, and I hope to see you next week. Who knows what we're going to talk about next week? It's going to be a surprise.
Thank you
Take
so
care,
much.
everybody.
Thanks, Miffi.